Okay, so I'm from the States. I am currently located in Nairobi, Kenya, and I'm doing a lot of Unity related education in Africa. So that's why we have this Level Up Africa game theme. So in today's talk, we'll do some introductions. Who am I? What is my experience? So Kevin, I already know because we've worked together at Master for a while, but Farooq's new. So we'll each do a quick 30-second recap, whether you know me or not. So everyone watching this video can know what you're up to. In that, I'll ask, like, what kind of job would you love to have? So it's also a great chance to promote yourself because these videos will be on my YouTube. So we're going to talk about user interfaces, like what are they in general? And also we'll look at some examples. And spoiler alert, when we go through those examples, keep an eye on one of them because your assignment will be to pick one of those and then try and replicate it in Unity using the UI tools. So there are a couple different AAA games there. So as I'm showing those examples, keep an eye out for which one you think would be interesting. And I have the 4K version of the image for you to use later. So within the Unity space, we'll look at the different user interface frameworks that are in Unity. There's a bunch, and quite confusingly, one of the things that Unity does as a tool chain is kind of reinvent their own solutions for subsystems. So in UI, there's been quite a few along the 12, 13, 14 years of Unity's history. But the newest one we're going to focus on is called UI Toolkit. So part of why I mention that is because you may already think you know how to do UI in Unity, and that's awesome. There's definitely use cases that work well. But what I'm showing to you today is probably brand new for you. And we'll talk a little bit about the pros and cons of why the new system is cool and how it compares to the others. Then the new system has a lot to do with how the web works with UI. So we'll be talking a bit about HTML and CSS and JavaScript just to compare them to Unity. Now, those are not the tools that we're going to be using, but there's some similarities. So that's why I mention it. Then we'll end with me doing a demo, and then we'll probably take a break, maybe a break before then too. And then there'll be a chance for you guys to spend some time getting your hands dirty. So I'm thinking we'll do about an hour of the slides, but I haven't timed them out. Then I'll show a demo. Then you guys will each do a workshop. I'll give you a specific assignment. So you'll need Unity 2022 dot whatever, but if it's the latest one from the last week or so, that's best. And then we'll have some time over at the end to either share ideas or maybe one of these sections goes a little bit long. And remind me about every hour to take a break. And we can do it all at the same time. Since we're so few people, there isn't a need for like us to pop up and take a bathroom break at different times. It would be nice to do it together. So some introductions. My name is Sam. I am from the States. I'm currently in Nairobi, Kenya. I've been traveling in Africa for a couple years, and I've been outside the States for 13 years. I love traveling, and I'm a full-time digital nomad. I've also loved Unity and making games. So I've been making games for 20 some years, using Unity for the last 10, and teaching Unity for almost as long. And that's really where my focus is now, is creating educational content and working as a mentor or a teacher or creating educational products as well. I've done all that kind of stuff. So within Unity alone, I've shipped projects for all these different platforms that Unity supports. I haven't done any VR yet, but I've played around with it as a dev, and it's quite cool. I've worked on a bunch of different projects and games, and some of them are Unity, some of them are not, but Subway Surfers and Blades of Brim are Unity projects, and quite a bit of what we're looking at is as well. I've taught at some US universities, teaching game design, game development in the Los Angeles area, as well as doing tons of corporate training where I go in and visit a team and help them do something specific like UI Toolkit, even people that are already into Unity. My last couple years of education has mostly been focused around Web3 and Unity. So connecting things like the blockchain, cryptocurrencies, ETH and Ethereum, and bringing all that into Unity, like how and why you would want to expand your Unity knowledge into that those types of platforms. So there's lots of cool free educational content you can find on my website, which we'll link to at the very end. Some of the technology involved with Web3 is listed here. And it's also just a reminder to me that, I use tools like Udemy to create online courses for paid content. I use YouTube for tons of free content like this video we're doing now. I also put a lot of free projects on Git. So like the one we're doing in this course today, you'll be able to download and play with it. It's all free. So I'd like each of you guys to unmute yourself. We'll just start with Farooq first. Tell me what your career aspirations are, or what you're already doing in gaming if you're working in it, what your kind of mission is in that, and where you're located. Also tell me what you'd like to get out of today's course as well. So go ahead, Farooq, you go first.
Okay. My name is Farooq. I'm a Edinburgh-based game developer. I've just finished a MA in game design. I moved to the UK for that MA. I'm currently working on 2 projects which are funded by accelerators. One is with Code Coven as a part of the Solstice program. That's an Unreal-based project. And my team is going to start working on a Unity-based project, which has a lot of UI work in June as a part of Transfuser 2023. On that project, I'm the project manager, but I'm also going to be working on overhauling the UI-based interactive systems in that project. So that's kind of what I'd like to get out of this course as well, is to update myself on UI Toolkit and see how it could potentially be beneficial to my work.
That's super cool. So on that note, one of the things we'll touch on, but it's something for you to dig in a bit more afterwards, is exactly where is the feature set of UI Toolkit, because it's still growing, and how does it compare to the current status quo, which is called Unity UI. There are things you cannot do in the technology we're going over today. It's now so few things, you could probably steer your way around it. A year ago, there's just categorically popular, useful things you couldn't do. But today it's pretty good. So, as you're learning, keep an ear out for like anything I say. UI Toolkit doesn't yet support this. But I'm confident that most all projects could meet their needs using what we're covering today. In the past few months, it's even become rapidly on par with what you can do. So thanks for that. Welcome. And Kevin, you go ahead.
Hello, my name is Kevin, and I had a science academic background and changed to straight coding. I did a lot of coding in research, but it was mainly for Python and Perl and data manipulation and workflows and that kind of thing. But as I did some full stack developer training since, and a few like short contract works as a software developer. But I got into Unity, been interested in that for a couple of years, and got onto the mastered course. And I met Sam, and he was my one-to-one technical mentor, and he'd given me a lot of career advice. And in that time, he said that it's likely that first jobs tend to be UI jobs, so obviously this is a good place for me to be to learn more about the new UI system in Unity. And I'm looking to work remote or hybrid and based in Essex in the UK. Okay.
That sounds awesome. Thanks. So on the idea of getting jobs using today's tech, again, because this is such a new version of what you can do in UI, probably if you see a job listing UI Unity game dev today, they're going to want you to use Unity UI. It's now at the point where you could be using the new tech. Certainly teams that sit down and start, like Farooq mentioned, if he's going to be the thought leader that gets to decide, he might go, okay, I get that this is new, probably less resources available. Maybe it's a little rough around the edges, but there's so much value offered that let's go for it, right? So teams are going to start making that choice. So we're at an inflection point now, especially with Unity 2022 in LTS as of this week. Really excited to see that. Cool. So thank you guys for that. Let me click back here so I can tap on. So as I mentioned before, the Level Up Africa program is something that I created during my time in Africa, and I'm meeting with a lot of local companies and educators and community organizers. I just did a long live stream yesterday, for example, that'll be coming out soon, about how the Nairobi game scene uses Unity and other tools for game dev. So I'm particularly passionate about what's happening here from game players in the African continent and also game developers, right? So I'm really excited for that. So yeah, so that's that. The project here, there will be a link below once this video goes up online. And for you guys participating, I'll give you the link while we're talking, and you'll work within this project, which is called the Level Up Africa Sample Project. So I'll make that available for you during the workshop section. And some of it has some assets just for you to play with. I think I'm going to give you 2 assignments, and one is going to be to create something from scratch, but I'd still like you to do it in this project. And the second one is going to be to extend this little spaceship demo I have. So I've got some simple UI there, and you're going to have an opportunity to add features to it or revamp it and stuff. So we'll talk about that later. And then for anyone watching at home, you'll be able to, download and play along. So that's the end of the first section. We've just got an idea of the overview, the time frame, who we all are. We'll do a little Q&A card like this every, I don't know, 15 minutes or so. So any of you guys have any questions up to this point?
Yes, so just a quick one on what we went over on the last slide. Do you work in a downloaded version of it, or do you create from scratch in whatever editor version you can?
Yeah, so I will give you the Git URL, and you can download it as a zip, or if you're familiar with Git, to use like GitHub Desktop. You'll open that project up as your project in the Unity version you have. Cool? So you don't need to have another project. Cool. So let's start by talking about user interfaces in general. So my own experience as a game developer, I started on the creative side. My background in education is in visual design, in being a painter as well, studio painter. So I started out on that end, but most of my career has been on the tech side. I fell into that. I learned more on the job. I just love the tech side of stuff. But, being in game development, it's a kind of tech that is quite creative anyway. So there's always opportunities to get in here. I would say that on a game team, you could be a programmer using today's tools, or you could be a graphic designer using today's tools. I see both of those disciplines really coming in and taking advantage of this. And one of the cool benefits is the way that it's structured. It separates kind of the codey part from the designy part better than any UI system I've used before. So there's really an opportunity to collaborate using this tool as kind of the middleman. So user interfaces, they are the in-game text, buttons, all types of HUD elements that we see throughout games. Like, we take it for granted that there's going to be user interface or GUI throughout the user experience. So in the screenshot here, we see an example of some kind of dialogue text, which is one type of UI, but UI has all sorts of different ways to plug into the game experience. A really well-designed UI kind of falls away from the user experience. They should take it for granted that it's easy to use. And even in AAA games that you love, sometimes the UI frustrates you. Either it's overly complicated or features are nested deep down. Some of it is a sign of overly complex game design. And some of it is maybe just that the UI isn't designed as smoothly as it could be. But you want to have your UI to be useful and also be part of the story that the game is telling. So some of the considerations when you're making UI and choosing a UI framework is that it be adaptive. I refer to this as liquid layout. But when you go to a web page, you take it for granted that you can change the dimensions of your Chrome window, and the web page layout respects that, right? We all kind of understand that because there's historically been different sizes of screens and different resolutions on PCs, the web just had to be designed that way. But much of us, when we're creating games for a particular platform, we take for granted that we're launching on the latest iPhone, so let's only make it look for that aspect ratio and dimension. But really, well-designed from a technical standpoint, well-designed UI should be liquid, and it should flow to whatever the relative sizes of the screens are. Even if you only have one target in mind in the beginning, probably that target has multiple screen sizes and dimensions anyway. Mobile has hundreds of different combinations, for example, let alone you can turn your screen sideways and maybe your game respects that or maybe it doesn't. Then if you want your mobile game to be ported to PC or to console, they all have different sizes. So that's a bit about multi-platform support and being adaptive or liquid. Also, it's very helpful along those lines if the UI system is vector-based. So fundamentally in computer graphics for 2D, there's two flavors. There's vector, which can be kind of infinitely scaled, and there's raster, which may look better in certain cases, but it's not infinitely scalable. So what we're looking at today has a mixture of both tech, but a lot of it is vector. So your text, for example, looks infinitely sharp and stuff like that. It's very well done. Then a last consideration, kind of from a high level, is there's different render modes. So this particular language here is Unity specific, but in each platform you might be interested to doing UI, the same basic things apply. So you can have screen space, which is that you design text and buttons and images that are as if they're glued on the user's screen. They're very flat and they don't respect the 3D or the camera movement, for example, of the game. So we're very used to heads-up display or HUD elements. These are things like the speedometer in a racing game that's just kind of stuck in the lower right corner, right? So that's one type. Then there's camera space stuff. So that's things that maybe they're not stuck to the screen per se, but it's almost the same thing. But you think of like an in-game menu, right? It probably respects some of the screen dimensions and maybe the camera a bit, but it's not necessarily moving throughout the 3D experience. Then the world space is one that is moving through the 3D experience. So if you've ever played a game where as a character or a group of characters walk around, there's a little health bar over their head that follows them through the 3D scene. That's a very different type of UI than one that just stays stuck in the corner like that speedometer. So those are the three different things we're going to talk about. UI Toolkit has solutions for all of them, but it doesn't fully support world space yet. So if you have world space needs, you've got to do a bit of workaround. So that's one thing for Farooq to think about. World space is not yet fully supported, but again, there are some hacks you can do. So now I'm going to step through just kind of as inspiration, and also keep in mind if you're interested in one of these, because for your first assignment, you're going to need to pick one, but I'll have the full list available later. Just kind of in the back of your mind, see what inspires you. I looked for different types of UI. I just picked 3 AAA games that I happen to think are cool, but also that present a different kind of variety and tone. So I have a menu and a HUD from each of them. So here is kind of a more clean look taken from Halo Infinite. This is a multi-platform game, PC and console, and looks really nice and clean, and is completely 2D. While that background is pre-rendered 3D, it's a completely 2D experience. Then when you're playing the game, there's elements that are in the HUD. Again, that's the heads-up display, which is just a term used for things that wrap around the screen like that. So let me have Farooq, you chime in. Tell me what you're seeing here as far as HUD elements. Like, these are pretty comfortable things if you're used to first-person shooters, but just kind of explain what you're seeing.
Sure. You've got like a mini map with a radar style bottom left corner. You've got an ammo count and potential toggleable weapons in the bottom right, including a little menu message with tutorialization instructions, letting you know what to potentially switch to. You've got the quest, ongoing quest, the immediate quest on the top left. And you've got a style element, which is going down the top center, which is the Spartan helmet.
Awesome.
As well as the cross-aiming crosshair in the dead center. And something that I guess is a real-world map location of potentially a quest target, which is like a diamond slightly to the right of screen.
Yep. Well said. You nailed it all. I was going to stop you halfway through, but I did because you knew more than me. So yeah, the reticle at the center that indicates where you're pointing is probably the most functional piece of what we see here. I mean, it's all useful, but that very well done, very well read. So a second game here is Forza 5. So I love this particular game for a lot of reasons, but I think its UI is really cool and colorful as well. And it does something interesting that I think I don't see so many games do, but after noticing this one, I've seen some other ones since, where it makes these kind of big blocky areas out of the layout. This could have been solved in a more text-based way, but you can see like my creative hub, it sits as a big block, like kind of presented like a button, but that's not necessarily a button. It's just a different way to think about the screen layout. So quite cool. And I also love the treatment of text with kind of a semi-translucent background. So at the very top, each of the number of credits you have, your progress through the accolade points. I just love the layout there. So that would be cool if one of you guys picks this for one of the assignments we're going to do. It's this idea of always presenting text with its own kind of translucent background. I think that's kind of cool. And then in the photo mode, which looks like it's the highlighted button or menu item, you can see that one's a little bit bigger. So we'll be talking about how, like, when you're selecting things, how do you indicate that? You can either fade them or you can make them size change, and we can do animations with that, and all that stuff is natively supported in today's tech. So that's quite cool. Then in in-game HUD, there's that speedometer that I mentioned earlier. We also see some things like the 28 mile checkpoint that's at the very top, kind of cut off. That reminds me of what Farooq noticed before, which is the destination of where your current map waypoint is. That's located in 3D space, whereas the 75 miles per hour, I guess it is, speedometer is located in screen space. So this UI solution is mixing those things together to good use, right? So finally, our third and final game, we've got 2 screenshots here. So I picked Diablo 4 because it's a new game that's coming out. I think it's out today or tomorrow if you're a pre-order. Otherwise, it's next week if you're a regular person. And looks really cool. I played the beta. It's not particularly my genre, but I am excited to get into it and play it because I haven't played any of the Diablos, in their entirety. So want to get into that. So here we see a very different type of menu. This is maybe how you'd manage your character and the upgrades you can do. Very complex, very dense, and lots of opportunities to use really good tooling to solve this more effectively. Now, Unity has Unity UI as the most popular solution right now compared to UI Toolkit. You could certainly solve something like this with either case, but we'll see some definite pros of using UI Toolkit as far as how it would be able to organize this type of layout and also separate the job of the programmer and the artist on this particular role so they can work better together. So here is the in-game HUD. And I know that Kevin loves this kind of genre of stuff with medieval and stuff. So Kevin, tell me what you're seeing here on screen. Just kind of walk us through some things that you think are interesting.
Sorry, my screen layout's actually quite small in front of me. I'm on a laptop, and yeah, I'm wearing varifocals that aren't quite in the right field depth. So I'll do my best. Might have to. Go ahead.
You can pick 2 or 3.
All right. Okay. Well, at the bottom, I can see like what looks like quick slots or spells. Along like the quick slot bar with numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. And then you can press left mouse button and right mouse button to perform the next 2 attacks. And then there's a T button there and a Z button. You've got like the health on either side. This is like Diablo style, obviously, and they've copied that in a lot of UI on the store, on the asset store. I've got a version myself called Obsidian UI actually, and then over to the left you've got like the characters like which are in game and their names and their health bars and some kind of status above them. I think the first one has got like a crown on his head to indicate that he's the lead player, probably. Cool. And at the top, you've got like the current boss enemy that's being targeted, and you've got the mini map over on the right. you've got some kind of thing that you tab on there. I don't really know what that is, but maybe that opens up the inventory or something. And tab usually highlights things in these kind of games often. And then you've got like your current quest below the mini map. And
Sounds good. No, that was well done. Something else I noticed is there's a 310 in the center, which is probably the damage you're doing or the health being removed from a character. So that's cool. But you can see there's, again, a lot of mix here. The 310 is kind of world space UI. Maybe the Agron blue bar that's also kind of in the mix of people is world space. But then the rest of the things are either camera or screen space. So very well done. Oh, one more thing I wanted to say here. You mentioned it, that you can see the key next to some of the UI. So that's cool that it's not just UI indicates where to click your mouse, but in this case, it has 1, 2, 3, 4, ZQ space T. It's telling you, which other inputs you can do to get at that stuff. I first started noticing that with like Nintendo N64 games. In their HUD in the corner, it would always show you the controller button to do stuff. So it was kind of a cool way to guide the player through how to play the game just by having those on-screen cues, which is quite cool. Okay, cool. So that's the end of just talking about some of the inspirational games and some of the different types of camera. Any questions you guys have up to that point? Okay, cool. We'll keep plowing through. So now let's talk about different types of user interfaces. Now, when I was doing research for this was something that I wasn't aware of some of the terms that we're about to go through. And I thought it was an interesting way, in addition to the world space camera differences and distinctions that I previously talked about, there's other different categories we can talk about here. So of primary importance, you can describe UI as, is it within the game space itself? So, Farooq, I'm hearing a little background noise. Could you mute for me? Thanks. So is it within the game space itself? So that could be like the health bar on top of the character, or you imagine in some first-person shooters, you walk up to a computer monitor and you're interacting as the player on a screen. So that's a screen in the game space, right? And then secondly, the second fundamental question is this UI within the game story? So when sometimes I would find explanations of this saying like, does your character know about this piece of UI? Or is it only for you as the player, right? So maybe that reticle, that targeting reticle that Farooq noticed in the Halo Infinite, that would be something that the character doesn't know, but it's kind of simulating as if they put their eye through a scope. So it kind of blurs the line between is it in the story or is it not, and is it in the space or is it not. So on this little diagram here, we'll step through the 4 combinations of these. So let's take a look at the first one. So looking at an old school Mario Brothers game, if it is not in the game and not in the game space, like the number of points being shown at the bottom there, you would consider this non-diegetic, which is a term borrowed from film. So I know Farooq would know about it because he's worked in film. So non-diegetic things are for us as the user, but the player doesn't know about them, right? Then if it is something that is in the game story and in the game space, you consider it diegetic. So even the speedometer. Now, the speedometer as it's presented to us there is flat on the screen. Obviously, if we imagine a player inside the car, he's not seeing that, but he's seeing a speedometer that exists in that car world. So it's very much, again, in the game story, because the current speed the character's going, he would know about that. And it's also in the game space, right? Even that car damage meter, which is quite cool, it's meant to replicate something that's really going on in the 3D world and that your character would have some awareness of. He might be able to look and see that the left half of his car is smashed in, for example. So that's diegetic type. Then in a game like FIFA, you can see something like the button I think it's quite small for me as well, but I think it's the button you can click to pass to that particular player. So that's something that is in the game space because it's moving around on the character's head as they go through the world, but it's not necessarily in the game story, because sometimes the analogy works. If you imagine those players were cognizant and aware of where they were, they wouldn't see that floating over each other's head, right? It's really for us as users. And then the final combination is if it's in the game story, but it's not in the game space, that's what we call meta UI. So this is things like, and Farooq mentioned this, it's like, what's your next mission that you're going on, right? So the mission marker might be kind of in the 3D world, but this is telling you, this is actually what I'm pointing to here is, how as we as users can toggle over to the upgrades, right? So that's kind of the upgrade path, or how to use skill points is kind of fitting into the story, but it's not necessarily in the game space. So that's meta stuff. Cool. So we've talked about those 4 different types. Any of you guys have a question about one of those or anything there? Okay, cool. No questions, no comments. You're always welcome to give a comment too, but we'll move on. So now let's talk specifically about Unity. So Unity is one of the most popular tools to make games. It is often compared with the Unreal Engine, but those two are just some of dozens of different ways that game developers can make games today. So each of them solve UI in their own way, and even Unity has matured over the years, reintroducing a UI solution a few different times. So we'll look at Unity's specific UI frameworks. So first, a note on the software development lifecycle. So whether you're making games or websites or apps for a mobile phone, these are considered the major stages that your team probably goes through. From in the beginning, realizing, hey, we want to make a competitor to Uber. So there's the requirements analysis, is it's got to help people get from A to B in their city and connect them with a driver. Then you would do the planning stages, which is sketching things out on paper, using digital tools to think about what the idea might be and bring that scope down into something that would be a version 1.0. Then where you sit down to design, typically you would use tools like Photoshop for 2D work and Maya for 3D work, as well as maybe fooling around a bit in UI creation tools like Figma for mocking up your layouts. Unity could be part of those stages, but Unity is really the strength when you get to development, which of these stages, that's probably the largest piece as far as the time and energy spent. You would be spending time during the development phase making your UI, in the case of today's talk, also making the core gameplay as well. Then you would be able to play test and iterate on that in the testing phase, and then finally deploy it to mobile, as this icon shows, or console, VR, wherever, right? So now that we've kind of got an idea that we're probably talking a bit about design here, and then development when we get to UI, when you sit down to actually do the development in Unity, there's a lot of different options. I'm just showing 2 here. There's also an older system called Unity IM-GUI, and then there's lots of third-party solutions in the Unity world. One of which was super popular, called NGUI, and you used to buy it on the Unity Asset Store. Unity appropriated that and brought it into Unity years ago, and that was Unity UI. And it is an awesome system that meets most all the needs of developers, but it is now being, let's say, replaced or compared against UI Toolkit. So it's UI Toolkit that we're talking about today. And if we were to compare kind of some of the features across them, UI Toolkit can be used for runtime UI, like in-game HUD elements, like we've seen in the screenshots. It can also be used for editor UI. In fact, that's how it got its start, was adding dedicated windows in Unity that help the game developers, level designers, game designers do their jobs. And that's still very much possible, but I'm focusing on runtime today. And when you're doing the work with either runtime UI or editor UI, what is fascinating is that UI Toolkit borrows conventions from the web standards. So it does its layout in one structure, it does its styling in a separate structure, and then its behavior in a third. So breaking up those based on the proven patterns of web development over the last 40 years, right? Lastly, traditionally in Unity, if you're familiar with doing game dev in Unity, everything in Unity is based on the game object. The game object is the core fundamental piece of glue that keeps graphics and behavior glued together. And Unity's UI also worked in that. So it's quite odd as a Unity developer to see any system that is not game object based. And what we're talking about today, UI Toolkit, is not game object based. There's still a little bit of game object that helps glue it into the scene, but you'll see when you begin playing around with it, it feels a bit alien. It feels kind of like you go somewhere else in the Unity experience, do most of your work there, and as an afterthought, you slap it onto a game object. It's not like a button is a game object, a text is a game object like the previous system. This is totally new. And lastly, your main workflow tool is a dedicated window in Unity called UI Builder. And it is a little buggy, frankly, but it is awesome. It's absolutely awesome, and it's a game changer. And just for point of difference, in Unity UI, since you were using game objects in that old system, you would be in your scene hierarchy doing most of your manipulations and stuff like that. Here, we're doing most things in the UI Builder. Okay, so recap on that. I'll actually pop back here in case you guys have any questions about this, but anything in that section? Questions, comments?
I was just thinking, with the Unity UI and the game objects, you tend to do a lot of things where you have to apply them to the prefab or the prefab in context or etc., and then you have to override it. It would be, and sometimes in the old system you didn't always auto save it or etc. And I just think that the fact that it doesn't rely on that could be a positive.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Now that autosave reminder that you mentioned there, you still need to remember to do that because UI Builder has borrowed that concept. But you're right. There are some drawbacks to having things be game object based and kind of in the scene as tightly as they were. So we'll see. We'll see how it feels today, and I'll remember to ask you after you play around with UI Toolkit a little bit how you feel about it after some time. Very cool. Farooq, anything to add or questions?
UI Toolkit actually just sounds very similar to how the Unreal UI system exists.
Awesome.
So I'm quite excited. I've not really used the Unreal UI a lot, but I'm quite excited to see how this works.
Cool. Very cool. All right, let's move forward. And we're not quite at the hour mark, so we won't take a break yet. So I hope you guys are cool with that. All right, so now let's dig in. We have so far talked about us, this course, what is UI in games, seen some cool examples about the types of stuff we can do there. Then what are the different flavors of Unity's UI? And now we're all in love with UI Toolkit. We want to learn more, so now let's get into that. So UI Toolkit is a collection of features, resources, and tools for developing runtime UI and editor extensions. It is tailored for maximum performance and reusability with workflows and authoring tools inspired by standard web technologies. That's something that I've mentioned. The newest and best system, but it does not yet have full parity with Unity UI. So off the top of my head, the lack of world space UI is a compelling difference, but there are some other ones. And at the end of the talk, I'll point you to a chart from Unity that explains exhaustively what you can and can't do. But I'm feeling pretty good about it. I would love to spend some time in a real production project with UI Toolkit, and I am. Next week, I think, or maybe in 2 weeks, I'm starting a project where I will use only UI Toolkit and go through the motions creating a word game based in that from front to back. And I'll probably feel there any of the pain points more. So far, I've played with it more on an academic capacity. So I've kind of steered around, some of the issues that come up. But that's what UI Toolkit is from a pitch. And the screenshot there is from a Unity demo that we'll take a look at a video of. And this is Unity released a free game to showcase multiplayer about a year ago. And then they tweaked that demo to show off UI Toolkit more recently. So that's a screenshot showing UI Toolkit and some 2D characters and stuff like that. Cool. So what are the core assets of UI Toolkit? So assets are the things that sit in your project window inside Unity, and they're reusable, they're saved with the project. You somehow drag a reference in at runtime for actually using it. But here's the three big parts. So there's the UI document, and that is in a file format of Uxml. And that defines the structure of what we're going to be creating in the layout. Then there's a style sheet, which is of file type USS. Notice the U, that's the Unity version. And that defines the style properties. So colors, font size, things like that. And that supports theming, which is super cool and something that I don't talk about today, but you can imagine being able to switch your entire game from a light theme to a dark theme, or a winter theme and a summer theme, and being able to do that in one spot, which was not really possible without hacks previously. So that's super cool. Or iOS, Android. You might have your game that has a certain look to it for a specific platform. And then lastly, there's C# is used for the behavior. So it supports being able to ask things of your structure, like, hey, fetch me a reference to this button, fetch me a reference to this, and that's through a query language, which is new, borrowed again from web standards. So you can see here, Uxml, USS, and C# are a lot like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript in the case of most of the web, right? So there's an immediate parallel and familiarity there. So then I've mentioned that where you're going to spend your time authoring is inside Unity. We're still very much using Unity for all of this, but there's a new window, a little screenshot there of it. This is the UI authoring window. It allows you to create and edit those assets that we just talked about. You still do your coding for C# in your dedicated code editor, but those other two, the USS and Uxml, are done here. Now, you can hand write your Uxml and you can hand write your USS, but the idea is that you don't need to, because this will automatically generate them as you're going. It gives you a what you see is what you get workflow, and while it's a little buggy, and I'll talk about the little bugs I've experienced, 99% of the time, it is an amazing game changer, allowing you to make your UI in a real dedicated, clean environment. Super, super cool. And has drag and drop support. That's kind of the core piece of functionality, is that you're dragging the elements around and being able to update them that way. So here is a little screenshot of what it is. We'll be getting into this and seeing it inside Unity a little later, but just as a highlight, there's an area for the style sheets, one for the hierarchy, one for the library. There's the viewport itself, which is kind of like the scene view in classic Unity. This is the updated layout as if the user's seeing it. It's probably 99% parity with when you hit play. There's always going to be some little differences, but it's a really high parity. It's really, really cool. Then at the bottom of the screen there in the center, you get some code previews. So as you're working here, you could ignore the code previews, but just so you can follow along, maybe learn from it, you can enable being able to see the code generated if you're curious. Now, there are probably real workflows where you would start in the editor here, then go tweak those code files yourself, then come back to the editor. But that's another source of bugginess. I've noticed that going and manually editing the XML or the CSS, you have to be real careful about saving properly on both ends. And I've had some bugs happen where I lose a little bit of progress and stuff. So another area of possible bugginess is round tripping between the code source and the UI editor. And then finally, there's an inspector. So you can see that lots of this is borrowed from the traditional UI, of Unity rather, where the hierarchy is like the scene hierarchy and the library is like the project. There's some parallels there. So it's pretty familiar layout for us. Now, in the library panel there, which I've expanded here, these are all the controls that come standard. Now, I would imagine that over time, Unity releases more standard controls. The controls come in 3 basic flavors of containers, of controls themselves and then fields within it. So the fundamental control, which my orange box there, I mean to be around the visual element, but I'm actually kind of hiding it there. It's just a little snafu on my end. The fundamental element here is the visual element. So when you guys are fooling around, you'll be dragging those out. It's like how you gray box your UI. You're like, okay, I want to have kind of a header, body, and footer. Done. You drag those three out. Then within each of them, I want to add these things. So it's a nice way to mock up your UI. And the visual element is not just temporary. You could roll with it and use it in production. You can establish all the different styles and stuff that you'd want just that way. When you get down to actually wanting functionality in that layout, then that's where you use the controls. So we can see a button and a label. Those are two key ones we'll work with today, but there's a bunch of other ones. And then there's different fields as well. So if you want to have a label, but only accept float, then you can use the float numeric field. And there's some other kind of data binding implications of that bottom row. But today we'll be playing around with some containers and just a couple of the controls to get a feel. Then you notice at the top of the library image in the dead center, it says standard, but then it says project. If we were to click that project button, we would come over to the second view here, which is what are the controls, not that Unity's given us, but that I as a developer have created in my own project. So you're able to replicate exactly any control that you've previously seen. You have full access to the API, and you're able to make your own slider if you want by reinventing the wheel or by subclassing the existing one. Or you could imagine having very game-specific cases, like I'm working on a word game, as I mentioned, as my next project. So something like Wordle, and it has an on-screen keyboard. So I'm creating the on-screen keyboard using UI Toolkit and making it reusable so that I could use this on other projects and stuff like that. When you create these custom controls, you can do it with, it says XML, but I meant Uxml there on the screen. You can do it with C#, which is the snippet we see there is just C#, where you'd be manually saying, create new label, add it to the tree, create new text, add it to the tree, etc. Or you can do a mixture. And I'm still learning like what actual flow makes sense. Today's in the workshop, we're not going to be creating our own controls, but just know that that's a huge topic. And I imagine the asset store to be populated with people creating amazing custom controls, because the amount of importability, flexibility, stylability of what you can offer there is way better than what you could do with the previous system. So I really see a growing ecosystem. And recently I interviewed someone who is a UI Toolkit expert using it. And his thought was, okay, just like in web technologies, no one handwrites HTML, CSS, and CSS. They're always using frameworks built on top of it, like React or jQuery and that kind of stuff. He sees that the community is going to be creating a tier of technology on top of UI Toolkit, kind of building onto that. Not just a library of controls, that would be one whole thing, but other things, other frameworks about how things all connect together and architecture and stuff like that. So I think it's super cool what's possible there. Then the top menu, so if you go from Unity's window to UI Toolkit, you'll see the UI Builder window you can open. And there's also some other cool stuff like a samples window. So in that samples window, which is shown in the screenshot, you can click through and just see a ton of different samples, and it shows you the code that's used to make them. So if you forget the syntax for a label, instead of just looking at the online documentation, which is fine, here within the Unity editor, you can learn more about each of these controls, seeing the source code. I think this is a really beautiful way of presenting the different concerns, the C#, the USS, the UXML. Cool. Then lastly, I haven't played around with this too much myself, but I imagine on a production project it would become really useful. There's two dedicated debuggers that are being used here. In this screenshot, the big white portion is the result. I made a little hello world that we'll look at. Then in the top right, where we see these concentric boxes, that is a visual debugger that as the game's running live, I can turn on a mode and mouse over and inspect elements, just like being able to inspect the source of a web page. and it will show me the box model, just like your favorite, tool for breaking down how a website was created. Fantastic way to look at your own work live or in the editor. And then there's an event debugger. So as you have functionality where events of clicking this button bubble up through your code, you're able to look at all those events happening live. So never before in Unity did you have that level of debugging for any system, really. We have the overall profiler, of course, but this is an amazing system-specific set of tools. So super cool there. Now, lastly, I think we're almost done with this section, and so you guys might have some questions. But one thing I wanted to address is that this is a huge topic. I think UI Toolkit, there's so much. UI is a big topic, but UI Toolkit especially, it does so many things that there's a lot we're not even getting to. So I'm really focusing on the runtime experience. I'm not talking about the editor experience. So we're not really going to spend much time on custom controls, editor stuff, making property drawers, all that's possible. The UI Toolkit supports data binding so that you're more easily able to code to and from user interactivity. So data binding's never really been supported in Unity natively, but it is fully supported for editor use cases of UI Toolkit. But the runtime use cases are coming soon. I think in the fall, I watched a video like December 2022, so about 6 months ago, that was showing a version of Unity, a bleeding edge version that had this at runtime. So I know it's coming and it's listed on the roadmap, but we don't have it quite yet. So, but you can still create full solutions without that data binding. Traditionally in Unity, we're not used to data binding. So of course we can work around it. Then we're not really talking about themes. We're not talking about templates. We're not talking about persisting the view data, which is something about having kind of scroll bars, remember where they were the last time you visit them, things like that, again, we didn't really ever have it in Unity before. And then world space UI. So I mentioned this is not natively supported yet. It's on the roadmap, but there are really nice workarounds. So you can do that floating health bar over a character's head with some workarounds without relying on the old system. I thought the workaround would be, okay, use the old system for that particular aspect. And on that note, you could combine the two technologies. You could be using some Unity UI for some part of your game and UI Toolkit for others. They not really meant to be plugged in together, but you could imagine creating or reusing old systems for certain areas of your UI and using UI Toolkit for new systems. You could certainly do that, right? And then there's more stuff that we haven't gotten to yet. So let's take a look at this video. This is a video provided by Unity about their own free sample project. Now, I know that when you guys watch this video, it's going to be at like 5 frames a second, so I apologize. I'm also recording it at high res on my end for the end users. They'll get to see it prettier. So I apologize for that, but I'm also going to play it silently. But as it's ticking by, just take a look at some of the things that we're seeing here. So again, no sound is being played by purpose. So we've got this different types of UI you can do, really cool variety of stuff, being able to do in like an RPG setting, all sorts of different layout, functionality. There's animations that happen in the UI. A lot of font support is there, all sorts of really cool stuff for this sample game. They're doing in-game HUD, they're doing menus, using sprite atlases. So this system is very much built on all the sprite editing functionality that Unity already had. So you can take advantage of all that. Then it's showing there the ability to go from a summer theme to a Christmas theme, and your whole game UI can change if and when you want. So super cool. And then they tease that there's an ebook available, which I linked to at the end. You can get a PDF that explains like how they solved that. You can also download the project free and play around with it, which I've done. It is quite intimidating, even with what is temporary mock, educational use only. There's a lot going on there. I think they put the kitchen sink in to really demonstrate what looks good, and it does look good. So that's there too. And we'll keep going here. Okay, so recap. If you guys want to pop back to any of the previous slides, I can do that. Do you have any questions or comments about that section? I know it was pretty dense.
I have a comment, if that's okay. I was just saying, like, you've saying transferring instant themes, that's a great thing about like style sheets and CSS, rules and things like that, because you can just like rename something in a class attribute and you get a completely different style in the layout. It's brilliant, so it's something that they should have in there. Yeah.
Super cool. Awesome. Go ahead, Farooq.
Does UI Toolkit optimize better in terms of file sizes for the same assets?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I don't know the full answer, but when I was doing research for this, I do see that one of the value propositions for this system is that it's optimized for runtime performance. So I think that means less draw calls happening for the more or less the same UI. As far as file size, I would guess that's going to be similar because both Unity UI and UI Toolkit rely on, let's say, sprite atlases and layered Photoshop files, if that's your preferred workflow. And those have the same compression options regardless of which of these two systems you're on. Cool. All right. So let's do a couple minute break. I'll ask you guys, you can just leave your cam on if you want and just walk away. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to mute myself, just take a quick break and grab another coffee, and we'll come back in a couple minutes and continue.